Welcome to Wellspring on the Air. I'm Lindsey Steffen, the host for today's show called Own It. Today we're talking about owning it, owning our choices, owning different areas of our lives. And here with me today to discuss this interesting topic is Tova Kreps, our Wellspring president and co-founder. So thank you for being here today, Tova.
Thank you, Lindsey. I'm excited. This is a good subject to talk about today.
Yes, we're going to share more about the importance of taking responsibility. So some of you are hearing that and already thinking, oh, no, we don't like to take responsibility sometimes, but this is a good one to teach us how we can own it and just the benefits that we do need to take control of our lives and that we have the ability to. So I think a lot of times we hear culturally about own it, like, oh yes, girl, you look good in that dress, own it, wear it, feel confident in it. So we can kind of own our style. When I was growing up, there was like the whole goth phase. So but people own it. It's like kind of a part of who you are and your identity. So we're going to talk more about this today. But Tova, why is this topic so interesting to you?
Well, I think that if we could imagine ourselves owning our failures in the same way we own a style and saying, yeah, I failed and being so okay with it because we know we're flawed. We know we're human. We know we're forgiven. We know we're loved. We know we're okay. And most of all, we know we can learn and change. And so that's kind of the goal here is to own it, to let it just be okay. To be flawed, but also just to take responsibility for our lives in a very empowering way. In America, we have lawsuits all the time where we're constantly saying it's somebody else's fault. We're just kind of over the top in blame on whose fault, why these things happen. It's always somebody else's fault. And it's human nature to blame others. Adam blamed Eve blamed the snake. It's human nature. But the truth is there's an upside for blaming others, which is I avoid shame, I avoid guilt, I avoid these consequences for my bad choices. But there's a really big downside to blaming others. And that is that it makes us helpless. If everything is everybody else's fault, I have no choice. I have no power. I'm a victim of everyone else and what they do. And so you walk through the world in a very negative way where people have the power to make you happy or unhappy. They have the power to abuse you. And actually even people who are very, very excessively controlling or even abusive feel powerless. They have to control you because you have the power to make their life good or bad. And so they have to control you. And so this whole idea of, I don't want to take responsibility for my life because responsibility feels like weight. It feels heavy and hard, but there's a big downside. We have no power. The other way around, if we do take responsibility for our lives, yeah, we take weight, we take consequences. We have to admit when we're wrong. We have to work a little harder because we're responsible. But the upside is huge. We have the power to change. We have the power to learn and grow and influence others and do great things in the world. And most of all, we have the power to change. So I think to me, this is one of the characteristics of people who I call emotional athletes. It's a term I've coined, which is the emotional athlete. We can learn to be skilled emotionally the same way we can learn to be an athlete physically. It takes effort, it takes practice, it takes intention. But there are people who are really good at this and healthy because they worked at it, and there are those who aren't. So being an emotional athlete includes taking responsibility for yourself. So that's what I want to talk about.
Yeah, this is a great topic. So interesting. So we'll dive right in. We're going to talk about what we are responsible for and some things that we aren't responsible for. So let's start with, what are we responsible for, Tova?
Okay, Lindsey. So first of all, we are responsible. This is kind of hard to swallow. So let's talk about it. For everything that we say and do. Everything I say and everything I do is a choice. Now, I want to ask you, do you think people believe that?
No, I think we're really good at deflecting. Well, I wouldn't have said that if she didn't say this, or I wouldn't have done that if he didn't make me da-da-da. So some people are cringing right now listening, I think.
I know. And I do think it's true that there are some situations we can be in that what we say or do is the only reasonable choice, but I still see it as a choice. So for instance, if someone puts a gun to your head and threatens you, do you have a choice? I had no choice but to give him my wallet. Well, do you have a choice? Well, you don't really have a reasonable choice.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I do think that it is important to know that that is still a choice. you actually could choose to be a martyr. You could die.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's not a reasonable choice, but it is a choice. And so I think it holds true. We are 100% responsible for everything we say and do. And that, now I also think that does not include everything we think or feel. Those are a little more automatic.
Yeah, that's what I teach my clients. I say, it's okay. Any thought or feeling that comes is fine. We invite them all, but it doesn't mean we're going to act on them. So what do we need to reframe or shift in our thoughts so we can feel a little calmer or a little more relief, and then act in a way? Because I say you are responsible for what you do then with those thoughts and feelings. So I'm right with you there.
Yeah. Lindsey, I found some interesting research on this about people who takes responsibility for themselves. And the research, basically, this piece of research was, what are the common correlations of people who take responsibility for themselves? And one of the core ingredients of people who do is that they have a belief that people could change. Interesting, right? People who believe I could change will take responsibility. So here's the thing. If I believe my personality can't change and I can't learn lessons and I can't be different than I am, then if I don't want to take responsibility for what I do that's wrong, because it's a permanent flaw, right? It's
we'd have to reject it to kind of preserve our ego and feel okay with ourselves.
Exactly. But if we believe that we can change, then we have freedom to admit when we're flawed and take responsibility, say we've offended somebody. Particularly, this was true in relationships on this research. So I'll take responsibility because, I did that wrong, but next time I can, or I will. So I'm willing to tell you, so I learn, so I become a better person. So we see people who see taking responsibility for their failures as a launch pad to learning and success are willing to look at it, and those who aren't.
Wow, how interesting. It makes me think immediately of guilt and shame, how guilt is like a healthy emotion to know I need to change something. I made a mistake, where shame is more that fixed, like I'm bad, I'm wrong, I am the mistake. And that's more, guilt is more empowering, ironically, because I can take that guilt and do something with it. So I don't have,
be forgiven.
I'm not in a fixed state, like you're saying.
And I can learn. So one of the little pieces of research they did, they took these people and they had them read an article that some of the participants read an article that said that people can't change. They had these scientific articles that people can't change. And then other people read one that said that they could. And then they gave them scenarios where they had done something wrong to somebody. And then they asked them questions about whether they would take responsibility for it. And the people who had just finished reading an article that said people can't change didn't take responsibility for it. And the people who just read it did. So
interesting. Well, right there, it proves that by reading the article, they were influenced. They changed their perspective, their point of view. So, that's funny.
It's very funny. So anyway, there's that correlation. But next, I think we, as a faith-based organization, to look at scripture and say, does God hold us responsible for things, maybe unlike we do in America? The answer is yes. So I have a bunch of passages. I know you have some too, but just to validate this. So Hebrews 4:13 says, there is no creature hidden from his sight, but all things are open and laid bare to the eyes of him to whom we must answer. We do have to answer for ourselves to God.
Yeah, Romans 14:12 directly states that. So then each one of us will give an account of himself to God. So we're accountable for what we've done or not done on this earth.
Yeah, in 2 Corinthians 5:10, it says we will appear before the judgment seat, and each will receive what is due for the things done while in the body, whether good or bad. Now we know that we're forgiven through Jesus, but we're forgiven after we're held accountable. It's still going to all be exposed. It's all going to stand there. What we do does matter. What we do in the body. Matthew 12 talks about, a tree by its fruit, and that we are held accountable by the fruit we bear based on what's on the inside of us, which is our actions. And then in Ezekiel, there's a passage that talks about Ezekiel 18. It talks about God says, I'm not going to punish you for your father's sins or the father for the son's sins. And again, we can want to blame our parents and do, but ultimately we still are responsible for our actions. So my role is definitely.
kind of a funny thing I tell my clients. I say, you're allowed to be mad at your parents in your 20s, but if you're mad at them in your 30s, that's your fault now. Like, you can, because I think, yeah, you can be upset for not having the perfect upbringing, but eventually you have to take responsibility. I don't want to be 45 and saying, well, this happened when I'm 5. You have to take responsibility that things weren't ideal, but now I'm an adult and I can choose to live out of that past or take responsibility for my life.
Well, sometimes even people in their 60s have to grieve things from their childhood, but grieving is different than blaming. And so I'm with you. I'm with you on that. So let's talk about practically what it looks like if people take responsibility. So the first thing is they don't blame people, right? Okay. It's tempting to blame somebody. It's natural, but emotional athletes who take responsibility, they don't blame other people. They just take responsibility for whatever their small part was in what happened.
It makes me think of even just not making excuses for the little things. Like we're based out of Miami, so we blame traffic for every time we're late because it's kind of an acceptable thing. But I wonder if we just took responsibility even for the little things. Like, yeah, I was late. Sorry, I started getting ready late. Or, we're always having an excuse for everything. Oh, there was an accident or whatever.
Yeah, what would it look like if somebody came in and said, oh, I'm sorry I'm late. I really didn't plan well.
Because that's the truth. That's
the truth.
Yeah, that's usually the truth.
So we take responsibility for actions, and we also, that includes taking responsibility for how we respond to things that happen to us. So we're not responsible for what happens to us, but we are, how we respond is within our choice and realm.
Okay. So yeah, kind of like with a situation, what we focus on kind of determines how we feel about it. So we can even look at things like, this situation happened and we can dwell on the negative, or we can dwell on kind of like a learning experience. Like, yeah, that's unfortunate it happened, but what can I learn from it? And how can I kind of deal with it now and go forward? So I think our attitude affects a lot of this, us taking responsibility or not. Like if I have a more attitude of gratitude and practice that, research shows that I'm going to be less depressed, less anxious. If I'm someone who is, trying to focus more on that positive and not just staying seeped in the negative and kind of with a victim mentality. All right, Tova. Well, we have so much more to get through, so we have to take a break right now, though. So listeners, definitely join back in. We're going to be right back. This is Lindsey Steffen with Wellspring on the Air. Welcome back to Wellspring on the Air. This is Lindsey and Tova, and we've been talking about Own It. That's the title of today's show. Own it, own your choices, own your actions, take responsibility for the day-to-day choices we're making. And so we talked about we're not necessarily responsible for the feelings or thoughts that come. Those are automatic, but we are responsible for the actions that we take. So if you're just joining our show, we've been talking about how do healthy people take responsibility for themselves. If you joined us late, you can find us on your favorite podcast channel, Wellspring on the Air, or you can go to our blog page at wellspringmiami.org and just search for this topic. So let's dive back in, Tova. We were talking about what does it look like practically when people take responsibility for themselves?
Yeah, so we talked about, we take responsibility for how we respond to things that happen to us. We also, healthy people are able to actually examine their choices and maybe anticipate it. If you get good at taking responsibility for things, you begin to spend a little more effort anticipating things. It's like, I know I'm going to have to own this, so I better think twice about what's going to happen. Versus, I can get away with it. I can sneak it. I can hide it. I won't, no one will know. If you have those beliefs, you're not going to examine it as well. But those of us who say, no, I always own everything I choose, think twice. And we plan. So that, I think, is what it looks like practically.
So I guess you're saying you have to be someone who actually accepts that there's consequences and that you have influence, whether those consequences are negative or positive. You have to accept your consequences and know my actions don't just affect me, they affect other people.
Right. And the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of the habits is to play it forward, to play the movie. And so it's like, if I do this, I'm going to play this movie forward, the whole video, this is where I'm going to end up, and so healthy people play it forward. They look through to anticipate the future because they know they're going to live with the consequences. And that's taking responsibility. Another one is that they do it. A trait of people who do this regularly is that they do accept the consequences. Like, Yeah, I know I chose that. I gotta live with the loss of money. I gotta stick with
Mm.
this job for a while. I gotta, you know, s- stick with the consequences of the choices we made. And other people like, yeah, I made that choice, but I don't want to live with the consequences. I just want to get out of it. I want to pretend I didn't make that commitment. You
Mm.
know, it can be hard.
Yeah, it kind of makes me think some of my clients I've worked with who never take the consequence or never take responsibility for the consequences of relationships. And they just keep jumping into the next one, the next one. There's never that time to feel, kind of the consequence of that past toxic relationship. And then one day they come to me, and after 5, 6 toxic relationships, there's so much to deal with now. So I don't think we can run forever. Oh, this trip will distract me. I can go out of the country, whatever, but we always come back and eventually have to deal with it, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, the long-term consequences of our addictions, or of our unhealthy physical habits, or like you
Yeah.
said, of relationships. But healthy people they own it, and they let it be okay. They get out of things when they can and need to, and but they own their commitments. And I think
Yeah.
that's another thing, is that people who take responsibility actually are predictable and dependable, because they do follow through on their commitments.
Mm.
They own I'm responsible for it. So you find them to be predictable people. They said
Yeah.
they're going to be there, they're going to do it, even if it costs them something, because they're going to take responsibility for their words and their promises. And so you
Okay.
see that they're like, okay, I can depend on that person.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, yeah, because they're empowered and actually believe that the next choice they make has a cause and effect kind of relationship. So,
Take
okay.
responsibility. All right. So I want to bring up this other topic about taking responsibility, and that is for our personal happiness.
Okay.
So I think a lot of times we think other people are responsible to make us happy, or it's their fault that they make us unhappy. And I believe we're actually responsible for our own happiness. You
Wow.
can be in a bad job or a bad relationship and say, that's why I'm unhappy. And that there's some truth to that. People influence us profoundly, especially if they're particularly toxic or something. But we need to say, I got to do something about this. I got to get a different job, or I got to do this, if God says you're stuck here for a while, then it's a spiritual discipline to learn, ask God to help us be content in all circumstances. But the
Yeah.
point is, it's about taking responsibility for even our moods.
Wow. That's a good one, because I think this is something where, and again, you probably see this mostly in our couples counseling, but it would be, well, I wouldn't do this if you didn't say this, or I wouldn't do this if you didn't, whatever. And so it's blame shifting, really. It's not saying, hey, I'm out of shape because I don't work out. But it's saying, well, you stress me out. And so I just come home and I just need to have a beer and relax. And so I see this all the time where we like to say we're not responsible for ourselves, because then we can blame everyone else for our unhappiness, our failures, but it's such a miserable way to live, and it causes all of our relationships to deteriorate.
It's true. And that responsibility for our happiness includes our self-care that you just mentioned. I'm
Mhm.
responsible to take care of myself, to rest, to set boundaries with people so I have rest, and to say no, and to do all those self-care things are ultimately they're my, it's only I can take care of my own self-care.
Yeah.
And then related to that also, in personal happiness that we're responsible for, is our dreams and our future.
Mm.
So I know people at later stage in life, I never got to do my dream because of you, and there may be some truths come in that, but those are your choices. You chose not to follow your dreams, or when you're younger, you're choosing not to plan for your dreams so that you will have that future you'd like, and that happiness.
Right.
Hopefully those are spiritual and godly visions too, but worldly ones and godly ones. We're not going to end up somewhere that we didn't try to get to, and that takes our responsibility.
Yeah. And you're right. I think it kind of goes into with the self-care, the stress management. So if I see my environment at my job is toxic, I'm not taking care of my body, my mind, my spirit, there are practical steps I can start doing today to start, kind of making some change there. And so we can't just say, oh, well, I'm at this job, so I'm just unhappy. There's nothing I can do about it. And I feel sorry for people who actually believe that. And I love to educate them and say, no, absolutely. The Bible teaches us you can be in a very unfortunate circumstance and even still have joy. So it's totally a supernatural thing, something that it doesn't make sense logically maybe or scientifically, but I've had clients go through very hard losses and I see a peace and a joy in them that I know is from the Lord and from the fact that they haven't given up. They feel like there's still things they can do day to day to move along in their process.
Yeah, it goes back to where we started on the whole show, which is there's a real upside to taking the weight of responsibility. And that is we have power to change. We have power to change our lives and make them better. And so it's worth taking the weight of the responsibility so that we can do things in our lives and change. Another thing is that gets kind of touchy is on responsibility is what we're not responsible for. So we're not responsible for other people, everything they say, do, or think and feel. We have no power or control over other people. So, I think there's a other side of responsibility here. So people who are healthy take responsibility for themselves and they don't take responsibility for others. But there's this little in-between role, which is they do take responsibility for influencing others. And that's the key word. We aren't responsible for other people's choices, their actions, their thoughts, or their feelings, but we do influence them and we're responsible for that. So I remember this as a parent. It was a very freeing epiphany for me somewhere in my parenting years when my kids were younger. And that was that I am responsible for being a faithful parent. I am not responsible for the choices of my children.
Oh, that would be freeing.
Or failure of my children.
Yeah.
I actually have no control over that. And it was really freeing, but there's a huge weight to I'm responsible for how I influence them. I'm responsible for being a faithful parent. Did I do my job? And it's a big job. And so there's a lot of weight on that I do need to take. But what a lot of parents put all the weight on their kids, they're responsible to be successful. So I was a good parent. No, you're a good parent if you were a good parent. And some of your kids are going to turn out okay and some won't. And that's kind of their choice. But you are responsible for how you influence them. Did you pray for them and with them? And were you dependable and predictable and safe to them? And all the things that we do to prepare and love our kids. But anyway, so again, great responsibility for our influence, no responsibility for outcomes. It's challenging.
Yeah. Well, what I hear you doing is just focusing on your faithfulness to your responsibility, kind of without such a tie to the outcome, which I can only imagine how hard that would be for a parent, because of course you love them, you want them to be successful and happy, but sometimes you can do all the right things and your child with their free will is going to make unwise choices maybe. And I know parents can struggle with that and feel like, oh, that's a reflection of me, but really they're now, they're their own person and they're making their choices. You can't control that. That's a whole nother radio show though, isn't it?
Well, it is, but it relates to responsibility because we don't want to feel helpless about and have things we can't control. And we really do care and want wonderful outcomes for our children, right? Or our job success or all the other things in our life, so taking heavy responsibility for what we want, but also then having to face what we're helpless over. And then we take responsibility for our response to it. But we don't want to be helpless. We would rather feel in control. So I'd rather control other people for an outcome I want and control the world and control things that aren't in my control. And so again, that emotional athlete balances. This is mine and this is not mine, but the things that aren't mine that don't go well, then we're left with grief and sadness and loss. And feeling helpless and that we don't like that, but it is actually the healthy way to go, to grieve it and to accept what is that's less than we wish, and then to turn it to prayer and to go to God and learn to accept what is unpleasant to us that is out of our control. So again, that emotional athlete balances that, responsible for me, not for them, but grieving them and taking it to God. And so that is in my power. I have the power to pray, right?
Yeah. And we're almost to the end of the show, Tova, but you said something. You said sometimes we are helpless. So I wonder, can you just touch on that briefly? Are there times when maybe we do have a real helplessness in a situation? What can you speak to that?
Well, I just think that it's just true that there are things we can't control. And that makes us helpless over those things, including other people, and circumstances. But we are responsible for how we respond to the things that happen to us that are out of our control. So that's that tightrope, and it's hard. And I think the real freedom as we wrap up is just to know that God is in control of everything.
Yeah.
And so we're responsible for what he gives us. We're stewards of what he's given us. And we need to take that ownership of it, and we'll be held accountable for it. But he is in control of all those things that aren't in our control. And so he's the place we go. He's who we go to for all those things that help us over.
It makes me think of that verse, Proverbs 21:31. The horse is made ready for the day of battle, but victory rests with the Lord. So we prepare, we get our horse ready. This isn't a modern day example, but we get everything ready for that big job interview. We do our research, but then victory, it truly is the Lord's will, the outcome of that. So that's very freeing in a sense. I hear what you're saying. Yeah. All right. Well, we got to wrap up for today. Thank you so much, Tova, for being here with me and talking about how we can own it and do that better in our lives. So we hope you enjoyed the show. To our listeners, thank you for joining in. And if you joined the program midstream, definitely go to your favorite podcast channel, Wellspring on the Air, or you can go to wellspringmiami.org and go to our blog page and look up today's show. Again, it was titled Own It. So encourage us, let us know you're listening by sending comments or questions. We love to hear from you. So email us at ontheair@wellspringmiami.org. It's time to wrap up. This is Lindsey Steffen with Wellspring on the Air, because hearts and minds matter.